Hello everyone, I'm Cherilyn Gilligan and I'm the Assistant Director of Archaeology here at the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum. Today I'm presenting data on the material culture from Arnold's Bay. I'm going to start with the underwater transects that were excavated as part of this project and talk a bit about what was found and some of our preliminary interpretations, and then I'll combine those findings with the terrestrial survey that was conducted in partnership with the Advanced Metal Detecting for the Archaeologist group. And I'll go over what was found in those survey areas as well, along with preliminary interpretations. And then I want to touch on some material culture that has found its way into our museum's collections over the years, as well as some objects that are scattered throughout the area in other museum collections, and what that kind of material culture can add to our overall understanding of this site. Okay, so Ed Scullin, one of our other presenters in our symposium, went over more of the logistics and reasonings for placing our transects where we did. So I'm just showing you here another view of those transects in proximity to where we know the Congress remains begin in the map here on the right. Again, we've not explored this vessel yet, but we have a permit into the Naval History and Heritage Command to be able to access that site hopefully this season. And then here on the left, you can get a feel for what those transects look like underwater before we started stirring up too much sediment. The underwater survey last year produced 95 artifacts that you can see broken down into categories on the left side of this chart. You can quickly see that the majority of the collection is made up of diagnostic nails. We've also got a section of modern or unidentifiable materials. We had a single piece categorized as apparel, which is a brass shoe buckle that I'll show you in a bit. And then we have this second largest section of ammunitions. To the right, you can see how that section breaks down into types, the majority of which are musket balls. We found 24 musket balls, 6 pieces of case shot, 1 6-pound cannonball, and then I've put these 4 pieces of melted lead in here as well, since one interpretation of these bits of lead are that they were musket balls that melted aboard one of the burning vessels. On the bottom left here, you can see that first pie chart again, showing the artifacts by category. So we're starting with that big orange section of nails. The map on the right shows where diagnostic nails were found along transect 1 and transect 2. You can see a big gap in transect 2 on the right-hand side, starting at about the halfway point, where we didn't find nails again until almost the southern point. A reminder that negative data is still valuable information. As we continue to crunch more of the data we've gathered, we will be able to get more granular information about the types of nails we found, whether these count as larger spikes or smaller nails, which would have been used in different parts of the boat's construction. So that is something we still want to analyze moving forward. In this image, we are seeing the scatter of case shot across our transects. All 6 pieces of case shot were found along transect 2 on the right-hand side. You can see they're all clustered at the north of the transect, closer to what we know are the remains of Congress. And then on transect 1 on the left and to the south end of that transect, you can see the location of the 6-pound cannonball. And there's a picture of Ed bringing that up to the boat on the bottom left there. It's an exciting day in the field. Now we're seeing the scatter of musket balls across the 2 transects, which is more of an even spread with maybe more of a cluster near the center of transect 2. Again, we have our reference pie chart reminding us there were 24 musket balls found along the 2 transects in total. And then above, you can see a size comparison of the 2 pieces. We're still in the process of analyzing these pieces using some excellent resources produced in part by Joel Bowie and some of our other friends from AMDA. So general note on sizing here, we should be able to pick out the British ammunition from American, British shot typically being larger. But again, we have some more work to do before we can have that analysis complete. We found 4 pieces of melted lead, several of which had a really distinct reformed shape that almost looks like it ran between floorboards and reformed there. It may be hard to make out from these front and back images up here at the top of the slide, but one interpretation of what this material could represent is melted shot from the floor of one of the burning vessels. And we are finding those bits of melted lead again centered along transect 2 on the right. Also, I'll mention here that the single piece of apparel was this boot buckle there on the bottom left. And on the map on the right, you can see that location is in the same artifact cluster marked as a yellow point. All right, so here are our very messy transects with all of the material we found showing. If you remember from earlier, that yellow section is where we have located some articulated remains from the Congress. And we're playing around with our data. We're trying to figure out, based on the material culture we found, where the location of some of these boats were when they burned. We remember from transect 2 on the right had that big cluster of most materials right at that center point. And most of the case shot there towards the north end of Transect 2. And the melted lead and personal apparel was found clustered at the center as well. So you can see the red outlines as possible locations for one of the burning gunboats there at the bottom, and then closer to the top, the potential outline of Congress, that larger row galley blocking and protecting the smaller boat while men are jumping overboard to try to get into shore. Again, preliminary ideas, but it's really fun and interesting to play around with the scenarios and compare what we're seeing with what we've found in primary accounts and what we have physically found here. And of course, think about where we need to test next year, well, this year, now that we have this data. And then that image on the left-hand side, you may have seen in other folks' presentations in the symposium. That is the painting by Colonel Waterhouse showing an interpretation of American soldiers under fire from the British ships at Arnold's Bay. Okay, zooming out, you can see our underwater cluster again for reference. Check out the mouth of the bay. So we know the British ships were too large to enter the bay. We have reference to the two sides firing back and forth at each other. So we decided to test the shoreline area, the transitional zone, where the bluff runs down to the beach. That is outlined in yellow. And then you'll see the areas we chose to sample in the agricultural field up on the bluff outlined in the pink sections. The actual class really focused on that easternmost shoreline or transitional zone. And if you think about people jumping off of beach boats and running to shore under fire, that eastern shore is going to be your quickest route of escape. So we also tested the other areas of the field that may show field of fire from the British ships. And then back behind the Ferris homestead, we wanted to test, again, checking that field of fire against primary sources and previous archaeology. And then on the left there, you can see our stellar AMDA class who did all of the grunt work, metal detecting all of these areas, collecting that material, and documenting those objects in the field. This picture was taken right at the curve in the field where you can see that two pink boxes are stacked. And the whole section turned out to be a cut and fill, unfortunately. But again, now we know that about the landscape. It was a necessary piece to find out. The map is still zoomed out just so you can see the highest concentrations of artifacts across the areas that we tested. And this map shows all of the GPS points we took, including boundary markers and uncatalogued objects. So there's a lot of noise on the image, but again, it shows those larger concentrations. And as we zoom into different areas, I'm going to pull some of that noise out and focus in on the diagnostic artifacts. So to start off, the survey produced over 260 objects. So we collected a bit more than that to have samples of the kinds of modern garbage we found in areas. And so for the next data sets I'll be showing, I'm working with about half the total of objects that were collected. So working with 123 objects in total. And again, the area on the southeastern side of the bay where it starts to curve around was determined to be cut and fill. So we didn't collect a lot from that area. And I'm going to focus in on the busiest area of that shoreline just to the east of the underwater transects. To give you that general breakdown of artifacts by category for the terrestrial survey, I'm lumping this data set into just 3 categories this time. Nails and agricultural related objects, obviously the largest category, then ammunitions, followed by apparel. And what I'll say here is I'm just going to focus on the ammunition and apparel today. In the future, we will look further into the exciting minutiae of nails, but for that study, we need to separate out the data by location. I would be much more interested to see diagnostic nails along the transitional zone or the shoreline, which could be related to the vessels that were removed and displayed on the shore historically. So this chart includes all tested locations, and there on the right side you can see the majority of ammunitions, again, are musket balls, followed by case shot. We also located a few pieces of buckshot, super small pieces. Kudos to the metal detectors who found those. And finally, a lead jaws pad or flint wrapper was found, which we will see shortly. And then we've got the breakdown of that apparel section here on the right. That's the same artifacts by category on the left that we just saw before. So we had 7 pieces of apparel. And again, I'll mention that as we go through and continue to refine our data, these figures will change around a bit. You can see I threw one of our mystery objects in here under apparel, but that's presently an unidentified piece. So we found some buttons, a few buckles, a really nice example of a bayonet scabbard hook, and then that mystery object that I just mentioned, and we'll take a look at these examples shortly. I know this map is still quite busy, but this one is color-coded. So the ubiquitous yellow in both the field and shoreline are nails. The red units are ammunitions. That pie chart is showing the ammunitions breakdown again. The darker red points on the east shoreline are musket balls, and the lighter ones are case shot. And I put some images showing the size differences for those ammunitions on the left side. Middle ones are that iron case shot. And now, these two categories of ammunitions we found in the specific areas that would have been underwater in the spring. So we were really lucky, actually, that the fieldwork got pushed to the fall because this whole area was exposed. It would have been underwater otherwise. And we know that the area has been picked over before, not only historically, but recently by trespassers. So, being able to gather that data along that transitional zone while it was really shallow is really important to our study overall. And then that top left, you can see the Jaws pad or a flint wrapper. And then the green units on this map are Apparel, which we will look at next. Here's the pie chart there reminding us how the Apparel broke down. We found a few buttons, one in the field to the right, one along the shoreline. And you can see one of those in the first picture at the top. And then one more behind the homestead. We found 2 buckle fragments along the beach. There's one example in the image under the button. And the bottom 2 images were the top and side view of that bayonet scabbard hook from the beach. And then we'll check out our mystery object found over at the homestead area. This is the last survey area from the AMDA class, located in the field behind the Ferris homestead, where we found a handful of diagnostic nails, again in yellow markers, some ammunitions as well. There were 3 pieces of case shot back here in bright red, and that darker red was a musket ball. And then those 2 pieces in green are marked as Apparel. One was a button, and the other was this mystery object. Again, a preliminary interpretation. I put this under Apparel, but we really aren't totally sure what this is yet. But it is a really interesting piece. It appears cupreous. It has that green patina on parts, and it's pretty heavy. So there are both sides of that piece. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to touch on today was some of the material culture from this site that has made its way to our museum from around this area. So much has happened to this site since the time of deposition. People have been removing objects from the site, starting with British salvage efforts right after the battle, to local relic hunters who took timbers to make souvenirs with, to excavations in the 1950s, 60s, and 80s. So objects from this site are scattered all around the region in different museums and historical societies, but also in private collections. And something the museum has always done is to make lasting connections with local people who have some of these objects so that we can learn more about them and share that knowledge with the public. And with all of this post-depositional research that we have done and that we continue to do, another goal for this project is to pull all of this information together and consolidate the knowledge that we have collected and make that information more accessible to people. And so here are just some examples of materials that are just from Congress that have been donated to the museum over the years. On the left, you can see an image of the portion of Congress that was pulled ashore in the 1890s. Below that, you can see some pretty big bolts that came from this wreck and were eventually gifted to the museum. Possible that they came right off of this structure. On the top right, you can see a window from Congress gifted to the museum last year by a local family. This piece includes the glass pane, which is about 1 inch thick. And it's such an interesting piece, and from a vessel class that we really don't know much about. So it's really amazing to be able to see some window construction techniques from a Revolutionary War row galley here. And then this is just a screen grab on the bottom right. But if you go to sketchfab.com and look up Lake Champlain Maritime Museum, you can see 3D models of 2 stern floors from the Congress that were donated to the museum. And our very talented photogrammetry intern, Taylor Picard, made those for us last year. So thank you, Taylor. And please go check out those 3D models on Sketchfab if you can. And thanks again from all of us presenting today. Stay tuned to our Goofy Dive team here for some updates this field season. We should be jumping back in the water as soon as the ice melts. And thanks again to the American Battlefield Protection Program for funding this project, to our collaborators with the Stockbridge-Muncie Band of Mohicans, and Abenaki leaders and members. And finally, thank you to our friends at AMDA for having a class up here with us. Thanks so much.